Welcome back for two final keynote speeches. Up next, please welcome Constantin Schwaab, who is CEO at Wirelane. He will share his views on defining the rules for mobility of tomorrow. Over to you, Constantin.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me this afternoon. It's 5:30 in the afternoon, and I'm sure that you all had a lot to digest already. So I will do my best to make this as exciting and inspiring as possible. And as you already said, this is about defining the rules for mobility of tomorrow. I'm the founder CEO of Wirelane. We are an infrastructure service provider in the field of e-mobility. So to start with, the utopian future of mobility. I had to look this up in a dictionary, and what it says here, the definition of utopian is aiming for a state in which everything is perfect. And I'm pretty sure that we all know this feeling. I've certainly tried to get to this state throughout my life many times, and many times I've failed miserably. So the utopian future of mobility, what does that mean? I'm sure that we all have a picture in our minds what this utopian future might look like. Before we get to answers to that question, I want to point towards the current trajectory. Which trajectory are we on as society and as humanity as a whole when it comes to the question of mobility? Well, there's a Italian scientist, a physicist actually, Cesare Marchetti, who came up with a pretty interesting rule, and it's called Marchetti's constant. And what Cesare Marchetti basically said over a century ago is that as we learn to travel faster, we tended to travel further, maintaining about an hour's daily travel time. So what Cesare Marchetti meant by this is that all the way back from the ancient times when you all sat around the bonfire and went to hunt and pray, we all had to travel about an hour to get to our workplace. Back then it was the hunting grounds, nowadays it's the office. But throughout that hour, depending on where we stand in the course of history, we would travel a certain distance. So going all the way back, we had to walk, and then we were able to use horses, the car, which would probably take us to about 20 kilometers per hour in modern traffic. So traveling that distance makes me think about the following equation. You certainly know this guy. Gottlieb Daimler is the famous inventor of the combustion engine vehicle. So Gottlieb Daimler, as many innovators at his time when he came up with the combustion engine vehicle, he said that the worldwide demand for motor vehicles will not exceed 1 million. If for no other reason than there are not enough chauffeurs. And as we all know, some would say fortunately, others unfortunately, this was totally wrong. So Gottlieb Daimler at his time, he could not fathom, he could not imagine the sheer magnitude and the success of the combustion engine vehicle. So going back to what I just said, Marchetti's law and what Gottlieb Daimler originally thought of the evolution of the combustion engine vehicle, it brings us to another important aspect, modern cities. By 2050, 7 billion people will live in cities, urban centers like the one we are seeing here. So now let's do some math and let's bring together what we just learned. The magnitude of urban cities, the magnitude of the adoption of cars. And if you multiply one by the other, you take the average speed of urban travel. I just referred to 20 kilometers a day, so maybe 15 miles per day, which we are able to travel in modern traffic if it's 1 hour of commute, which we do day by day. And if you multiply that number by the number of people that live in cities by the year 2050, which is 7 billion, it brings you to a flabbergasting amount of miles per day traveled by humans in cities by that time. It's 105 billion passenger miles per day in cities by 2050. So 105 billion passenger miles traveled per day in cities by 2050 is an enormous problem. We all know these pictures, we've seen it, we've lived through it, and it's certainly not great fun to be in the situation. So the question is really, what are the rules for mobility of tomorrow? And we are all certain that they need to be rewritten. So let's consider which rules that could be and how to apply those rules to modern cities. We need a paradigm shift here. This is certain. And a scenario for tomorrow. We desperately need this paradigm shift in this new scenario for tomorrow. So when designing the transportation system of tomorrow, I always love to go back to the great thinkers of the last century. And one of them, an outstanding thinker, is Dieter Rams, cited many times and adopted by so many great other thinkers. If you look at Jonathan Ive, for example, who famously invented the iPhone for Apple, if you look at Steve Jobs, they all went back and made reference to Dieter Rams, who invented many of the industrial goods of the last century that we all loved. Braun is one of the famous manufacturers for whom Dieter Rams designed many of the important classics of industrial engineering in the 20th century. So Dieter Rams, he coined a couple of quotes, which I want to cite at this point. Good design is innovative. Good design must be useful. Good design is sustainable design. And last but not least, good design is as little design as possible. So those are some of my favorite quotes by Dieter Rams. So now if we follow Dieter Rams and his quotes, where does it take us? I want to share this picture with you. This is my bike and my carriage. I have 3 kids. 2 of them still sit in the carriage. The older one has his own bike. So if you go after what Dieter Rams already cited in the last century, this is where it takes you. However, as we all know, this bike and this carriage is not the solution for all of humanity's mobility requirements. So we have to think further. We have to think deeper. So please listen to this short video.
In our inner city on the canals, which is a World Heritage, there are lots of parked cars there. Maybe up to 30 to 40% of all public space is being taken up by parked cars. So when elections were coming up in 2018, I said, well, I make you a promise, Amsterdam, and I will remove 10,000 parking spaces from the city center. And it's an arbitrary number, of course, but it sounded good and it sounded like a lot, and it is a lot. And we somehow won the elections. I don't know if the causal effect is only on this issue. It was very recognizable for a lot of voters.
Yeah, in a way, Amsterdam is not really suitable for cars. So I think it's a great idea. And at the end, it promotes interaction on the streets, it promotes cycling, it promotes walking.
Funny thing is, I read about this, but I didn't read about it in the Dutch press. I read about it, I think, on Twitter from you guys. It's not a big deal here.
So I really like how this ends, not a big deal here. So going back to what they originally said, taking away 10,000 parking spots in a major city like Amsterdam, and that was back in 2018, let's not forget. And that is certainly one of the solutions that works in a city like Amsterdam. But what about the remaining cars? We still need cars. This is the convenient truth, and we have to do something about it. The answer is, as we all know, all the attendees of this conference, electric. This is the answer for our mobility requirements of this century and potentially the next. So the question is really, if you all go electric, what will happen? And this is what it's going to look like in the next decade. We have seen this trajectory over the last decade, and we all know what exponential functions look like and where this is leading. The numbers here are just astonishing. And if this trajectory keeps going in the next decade, we will see a vast adoption of electric vehicles globally. But this again leads to new questions and new answers. And those answers need to be provided quickly. The consequences of this trend are as follows. There's various options. Either we can go all the way to a sharing economy, and this is actually the latest vehicle I ordered. I ordered my first Model S 9 years ago. So now I'm basically done with the ownership of cars, and the next vehicle is hopefully a shared vehicle. This vehicle is powered by the sun. So what you can see here, solar cells on the vehicle, and it's going to be a shared vehicle. So this is one of the possible options we have. And yes, we need less parking space for a certain number of shared vehicles if ownership ends altogether. However, this again is not the only answer to humanity's mobility requirements. We need more answers. Now, there's a good coincidence with car usage, and that is that 95% of a car's use time is actually downtime. So cars are typically parked for 95% of their entire usage. It's an extremely inefficient good to own. This is why car sharing makes a lot of sense. Only 5% usage. So now we can use this time to charge the car. And this is extremely important because we will need this time to charge the car. The electrification of mobility is based on 3 megatrends. One of them is, as we already saw, the adoption of e-mobility, the wide adoption of e-mobility. Once e-mobility becomes the new norm, and this is around the corner, it's not a decade from now, it's only a couple of years from now. Once e-mobility is the majority of cars, we're facing new questions. And one of them is, where does the energy come from? And we'll get to that in a moment. So the mega trend of renewable energies, and I want to remind you that Germany alone posted a record number of 50% of the entire energy consumption coming from renewable sources already in 2020. So this again is already a reality. This is not some distant future. So if you combine those 2 mega trends, the electrification of mobility, renewable energies, and you throw that together with IoT, Internet of Things, you get to that paradigm shift, which I mentioned at the very beginning of today's keynote. So now let's have a look at the energy supply that will be needed in order to sustain this new future of electromobility. And I came up with another equation, which I found extremely interesting. This is the surface area that is required to power the entire world, solar surface area. And I remember very well about 13 years ago when I built my first solar power plant. Was in Germany, one of the biggest solar power plants at the time was 1 megawatt. And I thought, wow, 1 megawatt, that's a whole lot of energy. And I started to think, how many megawatts would you need to power a village? How many megawatts would you need to power an entire city? And then eventually, how many megawatts would you need to power the entire world? So this is the equation you come up with. It's 500,000 square kilometers to power the entire world with solar energy. And this is not taken into account for example, the source of wind energy and hydro energy and all the other renewable energy sources. This is solar alone. So now an interesting equation, if you continue to think about this phenomena of car usage, you combine that with solar energy and the requirements to power the entire world, you see another square here. And this is the amount of square kilometers that will be occupied by vehicles if we continue on the current trajectory. So let this drop. We're talking about 168,000 square kilometers occupied by cars by the year 2050 if we continue on the current trajectory. So what we need to decide as society and humanity as a whole, whether we want to use the opportunity to change the paradigm, the way we use vehicles, the way we power vehicles. And we have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this and future generations to come, to go to an entirely sustainable transportation system, which means that 100% of all consumed energy will be sustainable. It is possible and it is desperately needed. And with that sustainable energy, we'll be able to power all electrified vehicles, not only today, but also in the years, decades, and potentially centuries to come. So this is the questions I wanted to raise today and the answers I want to give, my personal answers. And I'm very excited to get your input on my very personal questions and answers. Please follow me on LinkedIn. Please contact me directly, reach out to me, and I'll be very happy to continue this conversation offline after this keynote. Thank you very much, and I remain to be optimistic about the future of mobility. Let's remain hopeful, confident, and optimist. And thank you very much for joining today's keynote.
Thank you so much, Constantin. Tell us more about your optimism in terms of Europe having half of its vehicles in 2040 electric. Do you think that's something that we will certainly reach, or you would just prefer no vehicles at all?
Well, we'll certainly reach that amount of electric vehicles in terms of the percentage of the total fleet. And let's go back mentally to Gottlieb Daimler. I mean, imagine he invented the combustion engine vehicle, and he would never have imagined more than 1 million vehicles on the roads. Mm-hmm. So for us, with all today's technology, it's quite an easy thought to imagine that 40% of those vehicles will be electrified. However, yes, I also do think that we need to reduce the number of vehicles dramatically. And this is my personal wish for the future. And I think it's possible to get there, and technology will actually pave the way.
Thank you so much. You have promised something exciting and inspiring to us, and you have kept our promises. Those who are interested will keep in touch with you. Thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. And everybody here at the Mobility Summit, in just a minute, we will move to our final presentation. Stay tuned.